Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my early round draft strategy as we approach our upcoming 2025 fantasy football drafts. Now, the way that I see it, fantasy football has always and will forever revolve around the running back position. So regardless of what kind of strategy you want to utilize for your upcoming 2025 fantasy football draft, that being a hero, heavy, or zero RB strategy, how you address the running back position is going to be the key to your potential success in 2025. Now, I've always leaned in the direction of early investments at the running back position, whether that be a hero or heavy strategy. So besides sharing my early round draft strategy, I also want to go ahead and share data that I've collected this offseason that justifies my approach for our upcoming 2025 fantasy football drafts. Now, before we get into all this content, a quick reminder, football is back tonight. There are 3 preseason games taking place. So for those of you who are like myself, be sure to travel down to the description to check out Betr. You can go ahead and make some picks for tonight's preseason games. Again, like I mentioned before, I'll be partnering with Betr for the entirety of the 2025 season, not only to provide picks, of course, put my predictions to the test, but also provide rankings. For those of you who sign up today using code Andrew, make that first time deposit minimum of $10 and make a $1 minimum play within the overall football space. You'll get my draft rankings updated every single week over the course of the month of August. These draft rankings consist of by position, by tier, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, defense, and flex at a top 200 rate in terms of half PPR and full PPR. But the rankings won't stop there, as I'll send you guys weekly Sunday morning rankings every single week of the 2025 season in order to help you capture a 2025 fantasy football championship. So for those of you who are interested, check out Betr today. Use code Andrew. Check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility based on your current location. And if you play up to $10, you'll get up to $30 instantly. So why not take advantage of the opportunity on hand? And of course, be able to also take advantage of the new user pick of Jalen Milroe at 0.5 total passing yards. So take more on that going into tonight. Use code Andrew today. Thank you very much for all the support. So let's go ahead and begin by talking about how our first rounds should typically look as we approach 2025. When you approach a first round, you should always be within the mindset of trying to select a player, whether it be a running back or wide receiver, that is going to finish within the top 12 flex. Now, when we look at the top 12 flex positional distribution over the course of the last 5 seasons, 2020 to 2024 and a half PPR scoring format, we have found a total of 31 running backs, 26 wide receivers, and 3 tight ends in terms of the total distribution of representation. Now, if you guys remember this time last year, there was a heavy lean in the direction of the wide receiver position, as we had seen wide receivers being drafted at an incredibly high rate within the first round. Typically last season, it was about 8 wide receivers in comparison to 4 running backs being selected. And of course, this most recent season, we had a complete flip of 8 running backs actually finishing within the top 12 flex by the end of the 2024 season. So as we approach 2025, the market has slightly adjusted due to the dominance of the running back position in 2024, yet there is still a lean in the favor of wide receivers, whether it be a 6-6 split or a 5-7 split in favor of the wide receiver position. So the question remains, why isn't there a greater confidence within the running back position as we approach our 2025 fantasy football drafts? And I'll tell you exactly why. There's often a fear of drafting running backs early, whether it's due to age, whether it's due to injury concerns, or whether it's return rates of sustained success. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all 3 of those subjects at the running back position. Specifically, let's begin with age. When we are looking to select an early running back, we are specifically looking for players that are sitting within the age range of 22 to 26 years old. Why? Because over the course of the last 5 seasons, the RB1 distribution, top 12 ranked at the position over the course of the last 5 seasons, so 60 total players, 72% of them have come from the age range of 22 to 26 years old. That is the prime years of an elite running back. And over the course of the last 5 seasons, of course, that has continued to sustain. Now, it's not impossible for running backs that are older or younger than this range to find success. But again, the vast majority of these running backs that find success are within those prime years. Now, the 72% that comes from that 22 to 26 range consists of about 8.64 of the top 12 running backs coming from that range. So if we talk about what 2025 looks like, running backs such as Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane, we have Bucky Irving, Chase Brown, Kyron Williams, Jonathan Taylor, all within this 22 to 26 range. Now, Ashton Jeanty sits at 21 years old. Of course, the rookie running back could definitely be in this conversation, as we've seen 5% of running backs as of late. So as we all expect, Jeanty should be able to contribute. Then we have players such as Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, who are higher than this overall age range from the 27 to 30 plus range. Now, even though, again, they're older, we can still see them absolutely dominate this upcoming season and stay within this range. Now, one of the primary reasons that age is such a topic of discussion is because the thought process is that older players have a higher potential for injury considering the wear and tear that has taken place on their body. So let's go ahead and let's talk about the potential of age leading to injury. Over the course of 2024, when we talk about the top 28 ranked running backs based on ADP last season, when we take the ages of 21 to 23 up until 27 to 29 plus, we found 28 total running backs, and with the vast majority of the injuries coming from running backs that, of course, were 27 to 29 years old, a 17.06% injury rate in regards to 29 games missed amongst those 10 running backs. But when we compare that to the 24 to 26 range, it's still relatively close. I mean, the average games missed being 2.64 to 2.9. I mean, typically between these age ranges, you're missing about 3 games per season on average based on the injuries that have taken place over the given season. So even with this being the case, I still think that it's relatively comparable, and perhaps the assumption is far greater than the reality of the situation when we talk about the injuries in relation to age as of late. Now, I specifically have players like Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, and Christian McCaffrey on screen because, like I mentioned just moments ago, their 3 running backs that going into 2025 are over the age of 27. Again, Saquon is 28, Christian McCaffrey is 29, and Derrick Henry, age is not a factor for him. He's 31. And despite the fact that, of course, all 3 of them are older, there's a reason why they're still in the National Football League, is because they still have the ability to deliver, and we anticipate them to deliver once again in 2025. Now, other running backs that are within this range of getting older, we have guys like Alvin Kamara, James Conner, Aaron Jones, who were all 29 years old last season, yet they all delivered. And even though they're going into their age 30 season, there's still a reason why they're in the National Football League. We have other players such as Joe Mixon, Tony Pollard, David Montgomery, who also delivered last season at greater ages, that going into this upcoming year, even though they're going to be 28 years old, the expectation is that they should still be able to be fantasy relevant. Now, with this being the case, I'm sure you're still wondering, Andrew, is it smart for me to be investing in running backs when there are so many elite players that are still in this higher age range? Or would I be doing myself an inherent favor of selecting an early wide receiver? Well, let's go ahead and let's talk about the running back versus wide receiver injury rates over the course of the last couple seasons. Specifically, when we talk about the top 24, the first 2-round selections of wide receivers and running backs over the course of the last 2 years, 2023 to 2024, we have found 14 total running backs and 29 total wide receivers selected within that range. And again, there have been major injuries that have taken place to both positions. The most recent injuries, again, to the running back and wide receiver positions, consisting of Chubb, Jefferson, McCaffrey, and Puka, who were all selected at that high overall ADP, yet of course saw themselves missing a lot of time due to injury. So on the topic of injury rate, when we compare running back to wide receiver had twice of the overall representation. Again, 2x the representation, and yet missed less games on average per season over the course of the last 2 years when we talk about 14.14 total games played in comparison to 15.1 at the wide receiver position. And when I find data like such, that leans me in the direction of wanting to select an early wide receiver. So I don't mind the idea of drafting a wide receiver in the first round or even in the second round, but I'm still in the thought process of wanting to make an early investment at running back, and I'll show you exactly why. When we talk about sustained greatness, when we talk about return rates at the running back and wide receiver positions over the course of the last 5 seasons, we have found a greater sustained rate in terms of returning to RB1 status when you were a former RB1 the year prior at the running back position in comparison to wide receiver. Similar numbers across the board in neither position taking a clear advantage. So as we approach 2025, with running back having a greater return rate at the RB1 capacity in comparison to wide receiver ones, and of course, an incredible scarcity of elite running backs in fantasy football generally, this leans us in the direction of securing one running back and one wide receiver within your first 2 selections, regardless of what order you want to put it in. So the question remains now, as we approach the further rounds 3 and 4, should we be reintroducing the idea of selecting a running back and going with the heavy strategy, or potentially sustaining with a hero approach in which you're selecting one running back within your first 4 rounds, and only once you get to the 5th round are you reinvesting within the position? So I wanted to go ahead and talk about specifically rounds 3 through 8, where you would reintroduce an investment at the running back position, and why we may want to lean towards running back in comparison to wide receiver within this range. Last season, when we're talking about running backs that were selected throughout this range, there were 21 total. Now, 15 of these 21 running backs produced identical or improved end of season flex rankings based on their ADP. 3 of them fell short due to unpredictable injuries, making 15 of those 18 selections proper, which is an 83% success rate. Then when we talk about those 18 healthy running backs in 2024, 12 of which were able to find themselves identical or improved selections based on their interpositional rankings of just running backs compared to running backs, rather than being compared to tight ends and or wide receivers. 2 of these running backs were within 6 overall ranks of their original pick, which again makes it 14 of the 18 proper selections. Again, very close to an 80% success range. Yet there are many people that look at rounds 3 through 8 as the dead zone of the running back position. The concept of the RB dead zone has been overblown over the course of the last couple seasons. We have found that on a statistical basis, the running back position has found a lot of league winners throughout rounds 3 through 8, primarily because we continue to see people fear the running back position, which shoots wide receivers up the board into positions in which they shouldn't be drafted. And when you're overdrafting wide receivers, of course, it's pushing incredibly valuable running backs down the board, which continues to allow them to outproduce their overall ADPs within a given season. Now, when we continue with the wide receiver conversation and their success rates throughout rounds 3 through 8, last season, 34 wide receivers were selected between picks 25 to 96 in terms of ADP. 13 of those wide receivers were able to find themselves identical or improved end of season flex rankings. 12 of those overall wide receivers found themselves with unfortunate, unpredictable injury, making it 13 of 22 and a 59% success rate. When we go ahead and just focus clearly on wide receivers versus wide receivers interpositionally, we found that 16 of the 22 found themselves with identical or improved seasons. 2 of these overall wide receivers within 6 overall ranks of their initial drafted point, making it 18 of the 22. An 81% success rate. That's the number where it should be at. ADP isn't something that we should fear because it often finds itself a lot of success, but what we should be fearing is the idea of allowing us to draft wide receivers far too early in comparison to where they should be, as over the course of the last couple seasons, there's truly been an arms race for wide receivers throughout this range. And because of that, it allows running backs to be far more valuable. So as I approach my rounds 3 through 8, I'm looking to reintroduce a running back selection. So whether I do approach with a hero strategy of taking a running back within the first 2 rounds, and whether I'm waiting until rounds 5 to 8 to reintroduce my second running back, that's perfectly fine. Or you could potentially even select a running back in round 3 and get yourself within that heavy RB approach and still find a lot of success, because the way that the wide receiver position has been treated over the course of the last couple seasons has given us the ability to take advantage of this on a yearly basis. So when we talk about the potential injuries of running backs versus wide receivers throughout this range, when we talk about the last 2 years in specific, we have found 46 total running backs selected throughout that range in comparison to 66 wide receivers. And the average games played have been identical across the board. So even if you're selecting a running back or wide receiver throughout this range, it does not matter. They are just as injury prone as one another going within this range, primarily because a lot of the running backs that are selected throughout this point of rounds 3 through 8 are the older running backs, those that people are less likely to select. And of course, they're still finding themselves injured as much as wide receivers are. Now, again, the 3 running backs that I have on screen, James Conner, Tony Pollard, and Aaron Jones, those are 3 league-winning running backs this most recent season throughout that range that found themselves far more success than anybody had anticipated in 2024. So considering the sheer volume of running backs in comparison to wide receivers that are selected between rounds 3 through 8, there's a higher likelihood of hitting on some of these league-winning running backs in comparison to the wide receiver position. So when we're talking about early round draft strategy, of course, I'm selecting an early running back and wide receiver in the first 2 rounds, regardless of order. Then I want to find myself a positional advantage within round 3 or 4 at the quarterback and tight end position. I'm typically not looking for both positional advantages. clearly just looking for one of the two, and then filling the other position with either a running back or wide receiver based on what's available. Because again, there's been a lot of success at running back throughout that range of 3 through 8. So I could even wait at running back, start my draft with running back, wide receiver, tight end, wide receiver, then reintroduce the concept of selecting a running back from rounds 5 through 8, which again has found themselves a lot of success over the course of the last couple seasons here. Now, you can certainly ignore positional advantages at quarterback or tight end if where they're being presented to you within your draft board isn't the proper selection, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But before we do, I want to talk about which running backs we should be investing in, which RBs are capable of being a clear hero, and what running backs can be that second RB that you select within a heavy approach if you're not going to wait until rounds 5 through 8 to reintroduce that second running back within the conversation. So let's go ahead and let's talk about running backs. We all know that in fantasy football, regardless of position, opportunity leads to success because the greatest prospect of scoring more fantasy points derives from getting more touches. Not only are we looking for running backs who have themselves elite level talents, but also a running back that is going to get themselves an elite level opportunity share within their backfield. Because again, more touches leads to more fantasy points. Therefore, when we look at the course of the last 5 seasons, 2020 to 2024, there have been 29 total running backs who have gotten themselves 21 or more opportunities per game, 8 games minimum within that season. They average 17.06 half PPR fantasy points per game. 22 of those 29 running backs finishes RB1s within their given year, which is a 76% success rate. 15 of those 22 running backs finding themselves ranked within the top 12 flex, which is a 68% success rate. And of course, both of those running back kind of contingencies finding themselves a lot of fantasy point success, 17.63 fantasy points per game, and of course, 18.57. Now, the reason why I focus on 21 total opportunities is because it's the sweet spot to leading to 20 touches. Over the course of the last 5 seasons, the running back position, specifically within this elite caliber, has gotten themselves 4 targets per game on average and have been able to get themselves a 77% catch rate. So if one of those overall targets lead to an incomplete reception, we have ourselves 21 opportunities leading to 20 total touches, which is the workhorse level of production. But I don't think many of you realize just how important it is for our running backs on roster to have themselves workhorse level of opportunity. Because when we look back at 2024, weeks 1 through 18, running backs who got themselves 20 touches within a single game, there were 209 total performances of such throughout that season. They were averaging 18.33 fantasy points per game. Of the 123 of the 209 that finishes RB1s within their given specific week, they were averaging over 22 fantasy points per game at a 57% success rate. Again, incredible numbers across the board that going into 2025, we want to have on roster. So who's capable of accomplishing these kind of numbers? Specifically from rounds 1 through 2, the early ADP running backs coming off of the board. We have Bijan, Saquon, McCaffrey, Henry, Achane, Gibbs, Genty. Then the next level would be Taylor, Irving, Jacobs, Brown, and Williams. And considering how rare it is to find a running back with the upper range of opportunity in later rounds, whenever the opportunity presents itself to selecting one of these guys, you should have them on roster. And I'm not saying you should avoid the idea of selecting 2 of them. If you want to select 2, I have no problem with that at all, as you can grab one in rounds 1 and potentially in rounds 3 in the case if potentially one of these fall. In the case in which they don't fall, you could also find yourself in rounds 3 through 4, current ADPs of running backs that are getting themselves potentially 20 plus touches per game this upcoming season consist of Alvin Kamara, Hubbard, Hampton, Hall, or Walker. If you want to wait even further from rounds 5 through 6, you can find running backs such as Connor, Pacheco, Mixon, and Swift who could potentially handle 20 plus touches this upcoming season. Now, as you guys can see from the statistics on the very top, over the course of the last 5 seasons, there have been 253 running back performances that have consisted of ample opportunity. Now, this ranges from 9 to 30 total opportunities on a per game average. And of course, we find fantasy point contributions next to them in regards to more touches and opportunities leading to more fantasy points within a given season. Now, if you've taken all this data and information that I've presented and it leads you to selecting an RB and a wide receiver within your first 2 selections, regardless of order, this is how I think your round 3 and 4 approach should proceed in regards to taking positional advantages. I want to talk about quarterbacks first and foremost. I'm sure there are going to be circumstances in which someone in your league selects a quarterback in the second round or is crazy enough to grab it at the end of the 1-2 turn. Something like that could very well happen. But typically, we want to be aiming for quarterbacks in rounds 3 and 4. And we only ever want to aim for quarterbacks who could potentially finish as the number 1 overall quarterback when it's all said and done by the end of 2025. And there are only 4 quarterbacks in my mind that are capable of accomplishing that. That being Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, and Jalen Hurts. Now, as I approach my 2025 fantasy football draft, I feel purely comfortable with the idea of taking Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen in round 3. And only when I'm in the mid to late 4th round am I selecting Jalen Hurts and or Jaden Daniels. I think that is appropriate. And the reason why I feel that it is appropriate is because as it currently stands, they're all very much so capable of capturing that number 1 overall ranking at the quarterback position, which over the course of the last 5 seasons here has been a range in which you're either scoring 300 to 400 fantasy points. And when we talk about the drop-off in production at the quarterback position, once we get out of the top 4 quarterbacks, we're getting into the 50 to 80 point drop off. So taking the early investment of a quarterback will certainly pay dividends because of the separation of value between them and the rest of the field. But there's no time like the present to potentially select one of these quarterbacks because they're continuing to put up legendary performances every single year. From 2002 to 2019, between those 18 seasons, there were only 16 quarterbacks that surpassed 350 or more fantasy points. Over the course of the last 5 seasons, we've seen 21 quarterbacks accomplish that. So if you want to go ahead and potentially scoop a quarterback from rounds 3 through 5 that are going to be potentially top 4 within the position, and hopefully you select the right one and they become the number 1 overall within the given position, you'd find yourself with a fantastic positional advantage throughout that range. Now, again, if quarterbacks are taken far too early, if people are reaching for them, so be it. Reinvest in running back and wide receiver within these next 2 rounds and continue as such. But if in fact the opportunity presents itself for you to select one of these 3 tight ends, you should probably consider that as well, primarily because the tight end position lacks depth more than any other position in fantasy football. There have been more kickers and team defenses that have scored over 150 fantasy points than total tight ends in each of the last 3 seasons. So again, while somebody may be investing in tight end, you might as well just wait, invest late if you're not going to take one of these early studs, and might as well take a kicker in defense that is going to be someone like Brandon Aubrey, who's going to score more fantasy points than majority of the tight ends within the conversation. But when we talk about the potential of 2025 tight end investments, very similar to the quarterback conversation, you want to be investing in the top guy. And unfortunately for many of us, the top guy has been a rookie tight end in each of the last 2 seasons in Sam Laporta and Brock Bowers. But as we approach 2025, we're hoping that one of these 3, Bowers, McBride, or Kittle, can claim the number 1 spot because they all proved in 2024 that they're capable of that, and they're continuing in 2025 as the number 1 receiving threat of their offense. So when we talk about the lack of depth at tight end and the potential of taking advantage of one of these upper tier players with the drop off in production that is associated with them, you may be wanting to potentially select someone like Brock Bowers, potentially within that ADP range. I think as it currently stands, based on calculations, if Brock Bowers was to perform very similarly to last season and average 12 fantasy points per game and put up 205 plus fantasy points, you would, by all intents and purposes, have to wait until the first 10 to 12 running backs and 10 to 12 wide receivers were taken off the board before you select Brock Bowers. Some of these overall, specific sites in which he is being selected, I think it's a little bit rich for the cost unless he's going to be averaging 13.5 to 14 fantasy points per game, in which when you take him on sleeper at pick 16 overall or on UD at 19 overall, it's okay assuming he's able to put up that level of production. But in the case in which he doesn't, taking guys like McBride or Kittle are far safer overall investments, considering you're getting them far later. They're not into the 2nd round. You're getting them in the 3rd, if not the 4th round. I mean, the discount you're taking from George Kittle in comparison to Bowers, while Kittle averaged more fantasy points per game than Bowers last season, now starts this upcoming season with no Deebo Samuel or Ayuk within the lineup, makes me think like that is the best investment at the tight end position. So if I'm able to start RB, wide receiver, Kittle in the 3rd, if not the 4th round, that is a perfect start in my mind. So let's go ahead and let's review before we close out today's episode. Like I've mentioned, again, I want to invest early within the running back position, rounds 1 and 2. 100% of the time. Now, regardless of whether that running back is in the 1st or in the 2nd round, as long as a wide receiver is accompanying that selection, we approach the potential positional advantages of tight end and quarterback in rounds 3 and 4. Depending on where you select there, I would suggest taking one of those 2 positional advantages, following up with a wide receiver selection either rounds 3 or 4, and then approaching the running back position between rounds 5 through 8. And the reason why I believe that is such a fantastic approach is because when you are dipping into the running back position between rounds 5 through 8, you are specifically going after the 0 RB players in your league, and you are ensuring that they're not even finding any success within that overall strategy. Because if you were to take like a Bijan Robinson early, accompanying it with a wide receiver, and then another wide receiver, then you grab a tight end in the fourth, and then you were going after their running backs that should be their RB1s in round 5, like a Pacheco or a Mixon or a Connor, you really are providing yourself with the greatest potential advantage in 2025, in my opinion. Again, you can find success in fantasy football with any strategy. I just prefer the idea of a hero or heavy strategy, depending on how the board shakes out, depending on the scoring format, whether it be standard, half PPR, full PPR, tight end premium, super flex, all of that taken into account certainly does adjust it. But hero and heavy has to be the way in 2025, without a doubt. Hero being the preferred, considering, again, all the league winners we can find between rounds 3 through 8. All right, that's going to cover it for me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's content. Again, like I mentioned earlier, if you want to potentially make some picks via Betr, you can go ahead and find the link down in the description. Of course, get my rankings there sent from my email directly to yours every single week for the remainder of the season. All you have to do is use code Andrew, make that first time deposit minimum of $10, and make a $1 minimum play within any of these sports. You will go ahead and get those rankings from my email sent directly to yours. But for those of you who want to go ahead and potentially find those rankings and other access to content that I'm, of course, producing, you can go ahead and check out the Patreon. At this current moment in time, my 2025 Fantasy Football Draft Guide is available there. A lot of the information I presented today and much more is available within this draft guide, along with asking me unlimited questions, getting Discord server access, and of course, getting all those rankings up to date as well. So if you're interested, there's a link down in the description for the Patreon. But that's going to cover it for me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.